And then everybody who joins will hear that.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, I think we can go ahead. Let's let everybody in. Okay. There might be some more people that trickle in over the next 15 minutes or so, but we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. And as you all know, this is being recorded. The video is going to be shared on our website tomorrow for those who couldn't attend. And we'll put the link for the website in the chat where you can find that tomorrow if you're interested. So because it's being recorded, we just want to make sure that everybody who's participating, who has a question after Helen gets started, that you refrain from naming your child and naming the school. So we want to keep things as anonymous as possible. Even just saying my student would be a good way to phrase a question, or I have a question about my student, just to maintain privacy for everybody. So with that, I'm going to get started and introduce myself. My name is Sue Leusner, and I'm the president of Tacoma Special Education PTA. And I've all reminded everybody that it's being recorded. That's on my list. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce some of our board members who are here. One is Sarah LeCompte. Maybe raise your hand. She's our Family and Community Engagement Chair. And also Virginia Jeffers is here. She is our secretary. And I think that's it for our board members right now. So one thing I also wanted to mention is we do have membership available to our PTA. So if you are not currently a paid member and you want to be a member of our PTA and support us, we'll put a link to that in the chat where you can join. And also want to always refer you guys back to our website, which has our current schedule of meetings and future meetings. And if any of you have any interest in being a part of a PTA board, please let me know, because we're always looking for new people. And when we get new people, we get new ideas and we grow, and it's a great thing. So those are my announcements, and I would like to turn it over to Helen Caldart, who is our guest tonight.
I just put up on the screen. Can everybody see that just fine?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to say this a whole bunch of times, and that is, I want you to ask me questions. And if we accidentally say somebody's name, we'll try to backtrack that a little bit. I very rarely talk about myself, and I'm not going to talk about myself very long. One of the things is, like I say at a lot of workshops, is I'm not an attorney. I am a special education advocate. I have been for quite a few years. However, I do love to read case law. It's kind of one of those weird things that I like to do at night. Some people might groan. Some people actually say reading my documents puts them to sleep, but whatever. It is fun to read that case law. I've been a special education advocate for many, many years, and I've worked with families and districts and outside organizations. And I love what I do. I enjoy it, and I enjoy connecting with everyone. One of the quotes that I use often, and I think is even on our website, is that there's only one side to the table, and that's the student. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about all of us working together. When I say us, I mean parents, I mean school staff, outside communities. So we're all supporting the student as we're going. SEAL K-12 is a nonprofit organization, and everyone who is participating with SEAL K-12 are all volunteers. And we're here and we support families, school districts, and community partners. Unfortunately, right now, the amount of requests that we're getting is overwhelming, and we're not even able to physically get back to everybody. And that's really hard for us that we aren't able to do that. But we do encourage people to keep reaching out, getting on the website. The website gives you a lot of information as well and some documents that we talk about. Okay, now I'll stop and do what I promised. Does anybody have any questions before we go forward? I'm going to go on to the welcome, and this is a picture I found of our son climbing a sand dune, and it's in Pacific City. And by a little side note, if you've never been to Pacific City, it's fascinating watching the dory boats come in because they launch and come back in on the beach. There's no docks or anything. And literally they honk their horns and you have to get out of the way as they're coming in. It's kind of fun. Anyway, the picture reminded me of the difficulty of climbing something. And on the sand itself, when the sand is damp or wet, you can get a better grip. If it's dry and we haven't had a lot of rain, you slip and it's harder. I kind of liken that in regards to us supporting students. And the more we can educate all of us, I guess the wetter the sand will be, and the more we can get to that top. And I know it can be really frustrating to support and to work with this to help support a student. But I don't ever want any of us to give up. And we just want to keep ascending to that top. So it's that little analogy or whatever. I just like seeing the sand dune and how I know how much work so many our kids, our nieces and nephews, other kids, adults that try to ascend this. It's kind of fun to watch because they can just roll back on down. It's a huge sand dune. Doesn't really show how big it is here. I want to go on to what I spend the majority, I'll leave some of it up there. What I spend the majority of my time doing, and I was calculating it's at least 80% of my time, is I get communications in regards to behavior or school discipline. That's what I spend the majority of my time doing. And it's not just from families, it's from outside community partners, it's from school districts, and it's in regards to the behavior of a student. What's fascinating to me and also difficult to me is behavior in school discipline. You don't know you need it until you need it. And then when you need it, you're not even sure what to ask for. And I'm going to go over at some point the 3 things I constantly tell parents and school districts and outside community groups when they get a hold of me about a behavior. We have lots of documents on the school, on our SEAL website, and I'm going to go over those in a little bit also. But I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about working together. I had mentioned that before. Okay, I'll stop again. Does anybody have any questions? We all have to work together for our students. I know sometimes that can be really hard. I would say often during a week. Some meetings can be difficult. There's lots of personalities involved. There's lots of opinions. There's lots of perceptions. And it is important that our ultimate goal is for the student, always for the student. I don't want you to take this as a lecture because I remind myself of the same thing. Sometimes we can just get in the groove of a meeting after a meeting and we know something's going on with the student and we just want to support them. And we have to all remember that we're all there as a common ground to support the student. I wouldn't be surprised if some people, when I say that, start rolling their eyes, especially when I start talking about thoughts and feelings, because it's just not the family that's going into a meeting that has a lot of thoughts and feelings. It is school staff also that have a lot of thoughts and feelings. And I actually made a list. I know that everyone could be concerned about the welfare of the student. It's just not the family. Or saying the wrong thing. A school person may not want to upset a parent. So there's a fear that our ideas aren't being listened to, that we're being judged, that we're not liked, that we're missing something. But I think it's really important that we all remember that we all have the same feelings. And it happens at every meeting. We also shouldn't avoid those really difficult conversations. I'm not saying that we should go into a meeting and just agree with everything, but there is a way to kindly and nicely say, I just don't agree with you. You know, Denise, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you right now. And I mean, those are okay. We're not saying it with malice. Sorry, Denise, I was picking on you. Anyway, that's my little, I had to talk about behaviors and feeling. So as I was doing this, I realized there could be a lot of different knowledge bases when people are listening. And I wanted to go really quickly, some terminology. I've also listed some of the Code of Federal Regulations and the Washington Administrative Codes. I do that just because some people like to research those things. So this gives the explanation for what a free, appropriate public education is. I would say often, especially when I talk to community partners, I'm not quite sure what that is. Anyway, so here's the terminology, not necessarily a definition, but the terminology. And what SEAL spends the majority of our time is we're working with that age group of 3 to 21. And then here is the definition or the terminology for what an IEP is. And we talk specifically more about an IEP and especially design instruction or those related services. So again, the codes are there if somebody wants to research it a little further. And then what the IEP process is. There are specific procedures for developing and then reviewing and revising an IEP. And those are listed for the federal regulations and the WACs as well. I just wanted you all to see that because I'm sure you're going to run out and read it. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Anyway, does anybody have any questions about these? Is there another terminology that you might want to know? Oh, it's going to be quiet. This is a quote, and the person who said this is a special education director, and I had to go to him and say, can I use your quote? And he said, and do you want me to say your name? He says, no. And I always say all students are general education students, but he said it so well. All students are general education students. Some students also have special education services. So as recently as this week, a parent said, well, the teacher, the general education teacher doesn't want to do a conference with my student because we're a special education student. And I'm going, no, the student is always and first most a general education student and has special education services. I just really like that quote. To me, it was so simplistic, but it was so easy to say. Anyway, I like that quote. Somebody might have some experience with that too. So here's the paths. This is what I spend over 80% of my time. A parent's calling me. They're extremely upset, confused. Their child was normally I hear they were kicked out of school or expelled. It's typically an emergency expulsion, which is different. And I talk to them about the different paths they're going to go down. One of them, and I say, envision a flow chart. Your first one is the legal system, especially as our students get older. And I talk about the legal system from the standpoint of what's going to happen if they're in the legal system and what they should do. One of my biggest comments to parents is when you're talking about the legal system, if you're in a county where they will do a forensic evaluation, now all forensic evaluations in the state of Washington are done in Lakewood. Lakewood? Yes. They're all done there. And the reason I like that versus a diversion program is if you have a student that has a lot of issues with self-regulation, they won't necessarily follow what the diversion plan is because they're so in the moment. So I have parents ask for that forensic evaluation. And the forensic evaluations, they've been really good. And what they also show is whether the student has the ability to stand trial and can defend themselves. So I talk about the legal system, and by now parents are going, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're going through all this. But it's very important to understand that legal process can happen. It is different in different counties. It's changed a little bit. You guys are in Pierce County. There is a process now that they'll do a mental health diversion, and that's fairly new. Then the second path I explained to parents, and here's my all students are general education students, and there's a general education process you can follow. There's an appeal process, and the appeal process is different depending if it's an emergency expulsion, is it a suspension, short-term suspension? So what is it? So that's one flow you can follow. And I'll be honest, I tell parents often to do the appeal or make the request for the appeal. And if there's any school district people on, sorry about this, because if this is at the building level, and very rarely are parents getting the documentation that's associated with the suspension, meaning they're not getting the whatever testimony or documentation a staff member has provided. And it's important because those documents are going to be a part of the student's records. And so a parent will ask for an appeal and then get that information. So now you have your third one, and that's the third flow, and that's the special education flow, and that's your manifestation determination meeting. One of the things I hear often from parents, they can't suspend my student is special education. I go, yes, they can suspend your special education student. The difference is that manifestation process. And I talked about the 10 days, so they can be suspended for a total of 10 days in a school year, and then a manifestation takes place, and I walk through what that is. I'm not going into a lot of the details of manifestation right now. We can, if somebody asks towards the end, and I have, that's one of the documents that's not on the SEAL website, but I have available if somebody ever emailed me, and I've actually used that document a lot this year because we've had a lot of manifestation meetings. So those are the three things that I talk parents through whenever they call me about a behavior or some kind of suspension. Now, are there any questions?
I was just going to see if we can talk a little bit more about the manifestation determination hearings. If you want to do that at the end, that's fine. But I think maybe giving an example of something that happened to a student maybe that you worked with and what happened and what was all involved in that, I think that might be helpful. But you wouldn't have to do it now. We can do it at the end if you want.
Actually, I could even call up the document for manifestation and we can go over it because it is, so whenever a student is hitting that 10-day period for a school year, now they could be suspended for 2 days in September and maybe a day in October. But once they get to that total of 10, there is a requirement, and this is under the IDEA. So this is a requirement for a student. I was going to call it up really quick so we could go over it. It's a really good question because I am in probably right now in at least 1 or 2 manifestation meetings every week. And it's across the board. There's not one particular school district that I'm in one more than another. I'm going to call it up really quick. Like I said, that's a great question. Make sure I get the correct one up here. It's also a really, well, the whole behavior can be really scary for parents to start with. So I'm going to call up this one. So the manifestation is just special education. It's not general education. That's one of the protections that a special education student has. So here I am with the codes again that you can actually take a look at. But it's if a student is out of school for a total of those 10 days, then as a team, we have to actually meet to discuss what we're going to do. And if it is a manifestation of the student's disability. So here's that 10-day. I'm just trying to go really quickly here. If a student has been suspended, let's say a total of 5, 6, or 7 days, often a school district will hold a manifestation meeting before the 10 days if there's a pattern of behavior. Like for instance, they're being suspended for the same reasons. So then we need to go and look at the student's IEP and determine if we need to make any changes to the IEP. What additional supports could could they need? So when we're in the manifestation meeting, we're actually determining was the action of the student, was it related to their disability? Because there's two questions that are answered during that process. And that's the first question we ask. And then the second question is, would it be a failure on the part of the school team to not follow the IEP? So those are the two questions. Then we sit back and say, okay, what additional supports does the student need? Do we need to look at a functional behavior assessment? If there's already a functional behavior assessment, do we need to do a new functional behavior assessment? What additional related services or supplementary aids and services? For instance, let's say, I would say a huge part of the time when I have a student in a manifestation meeting, we look at additional supports from the standpoint if the student doesn't have a one-to-one yet, maybe we need to do that as we finish this FBA process or the behavior process. Maybe the student needs a more specialized support person. Maybe they need a registered behavior tech. What does the student need in order to have access to their education? One of the things that happens as soon as the team is determined that it's a manifestation of the student's disability, the student gets to go back to school. Now there's some exceptions to that, and there's 3 in particular, and it's called special circumstances. And that happens to be one of the documents that families and people can reach out and get from me. Like, for instance, if a student brought a weapon to school, that would be one of the special circumstances. One of the questions is who else should be part of this manifestation meeting, and it's all relevant members of the IEP team. And yes, I've included the codes in there. And then here's those 2 questions I was saying that we answered during that process. And I'm going to stop and go back for a minute. So let's say a student's been suspended 10 days. We've had the manifestation meeting. The student goes back to school. Whatever we've put into place, whatever we're going to do, and 3 days later, the student is suspended again. Do you have to have another manifestation meeting? Yes, you do. Every time you're past that 10 days for a year, you have to have another manifestation determination meeting. So anyway, here's the 2 questions. Was the conduct in question caused by or have a direct and substantial relationship to the student's disability? And was the conduct in question a direct result of the district's failure to implement the student's IEP? For example, let's say the student did have a support person on their IEP. Let's say that support person hasn't been around and that they haven't had it. That would be a failure on the part of the IEP. And then here's those questions about the FBA. This document itself is not on the SEAL website, but anybody can reach out to me and get it. I just don't hand these documents out because so many are the documents are specialized, but often what's taking place, and I think parents need to know what's happening. Other outside organizations might call and say, our student got suspended, and I walk them through the same process. So this is not just a process I do with families. Does anybody have any questions about that? I just gave you a whole bunch of information.
One question I have is, who answers those 2 questions?
The team does.
The whole team together with the parent?
Correct.
Or just the team? Okay.
The parent is part of the team.
Right.
The parent,
Okay.
yes. Now, is there a disagreement? Yes. Not so a percentage of the time, the team might feel one way and the parents could feel another way. And there's that prior written notice that the answers get put into, and then parents can use one of their dispute options if they disagree. It depends upon the team. It depends upon the school. So good question. Were there any other questions about the manifestation?
Yeah, I have another quick question. So for example, if my student ends up needing a manifestation meeting, and is it just like an IEP where I can also have other people that I choose to be present? So say, for instance, if my child receives ABA therapy, can I bring my ABA therapist to the manifestation meeting?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
It's back to that team approach. I am not aware of any meeting I've been in where the school team has opposed to anyone. Think about it like an IEP meeting. So, and I think it's in this document. And that's what they determine. I even have outside counselors and doctors that will show up to a manifestation determination meeting. So who else should be a part of it? All relevant members of the student's IEP team, as determined by, here it is, the parent and the school district. It's not all meetings are not who the parent necessarily wants, even though in that IEP process, you can invite whomever you want who has knowledge. And then again, there's the WAC codes for you to take a look at. Good question though. So yes.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, we just want to support the student. I'm going to go back to the document. Here we go. Does anybody else have any questions about those three pathways, the legal part, the general education part, and the special education part? And as we get towards the end, I list some additional documents that are available. If somebody asks, and that has to do with, a lot of them have to do with the general education process too. Let's move on. So, students need to be at school. I'm going to get to it a little later on this, I think on this page. So all students are to be in their learning environment. And if a student is routinely being removed from their learning environment and they're a general education student and don't have special education services, then that could trigger a child find requirement. And the child find requirement is the piece under the IDEA, a student who has a mental, physical, or emotional impairment, and they could qualify for special education and related services. Here's that pattern of behavior that I talked about once before. If there's a pattern of behavior, we might need to look at that functional behavior assessment and adjust the behavior intervention plan. So students need to be in their learning environment. Even though it's difficult, my suggestion always is, because parents will say, I picked my student up 3 times in the last month or 10 times, and I'll go, stop picking them up. And it hurts their hearts. And I totally understand that, because number one, if your child's really out of control, might be harming people, might be destroying classrooms, it does hurt that your child's doing that. But they belong at school, and we need to provide the services. And if that's happening, we need to figure something else out. Do we need to look at evaluations? And because we don't have a complete picture, what do we need to do to support the student? So my suggestion always is, if you're going to pick your student up, then you are only going to do so if they're going to suspend them. Because that gives, this is for special ed, that gives us that, we're closer to that 10-day manifestation and possibly some more support. Now, there are school teams that are fabulous in working with families and students with extreme behaviors. And quite honestly, there are schools that are not. And I'm not even picking on a school or a district. That's just across the board. I also constantly come back to, it is also an education and a knowledge place that happens. Well, we don't know what else to do. What should we be doing? And it's a matter of families or outside people or even district staff making requests for additional support. So one of the newer, I guess it's behavior regulations that went into place has to do with classroom exclusions. And I'm going to go over this document. This document is available on the SEAL website. And this is part of the new regulations that came out. I think it was the year of COVID, or was it the year before? So a school district is required to notify the parents if the student has been out of their classroom. So my example is, and some of you have already heard this, I think of Dave Pilkey, who wrote Captain Underpants. He always said he wrote Captain Underpants in elementary school in the hallway, because that's where he spent all of his time. So students are not supposed to spend all their time in the hallway anymore. And there are specific requirements if they are. And so this is a document you could read at your leisure. And again, I put the WAC codes for you to take a look at. So I think there's somebody on, I know today, who the student is not in their classroom, or where it says on their IEP, or they're not in general ed, they're not in special ed. And they're just sitting in the, they spend most of the day in the office. That is a classroom exclusion. They cannot learn if they are not in the classroom. And there's also reporting requirements, which I find fascinating, because a lot of those reporting requirements aren't being reported. But one of the things about the classroom exclusion is they can only be out for a brief duration. However, there is no set regulation in regards to what a brief duration is. One of the things I always encourage parents to do is ask for the district's policies and procedures, because every district should have an idea. I know a district that's 3 minutes. I know a district that it's 15 minutes. So you need to find out what that is. And there are limitations. There's the Washington codes to take a look at. And a classroom exclusion and an in-school suspension are different, other than they both happen in the school building. And if you want to know more about the in-school suspensions, that is on the SEAL website. I think that is all I was going to go over with that one. Does anybody have a question about classroom exclusions? If our kids aren't in class, they are not learning. And if our kids aren't in class because they don't want to be, or they're upset, or I could just go list a lot of things, then we need to figure out why, and we need to put the supports in place so they are in class. Any questions? Okay.
I have one. So I
Yes.
said it in the chat. But what if the kids are, I guess you kind of touched on it, but what if the kids are constantly just like, F this and leave the class, like a daily thing?
There are kids that absolutely do that, but you know what? Some of the kids who do that, and this is not all kids, if they do that, it upsets the staff and it upsets other students, and then they get what they want. Now, it could be because the learning content or the student is frustrated because they can't keep up the same way as their peers can. There is a lot of different reasons for that. And it really depends upon, fortunately, it depends upon the school staff in regards to how they're going to work through that. If a student's swearing and leaves the room, then we need to discover, even if we possibly might have to go all the way back to the evaluation process, look at why that's taking place. I know students who do that because then they get out of whatever they were supposed to do. And that's not going to accomplish anything either, because they're not going to continue to learn. Did that answer some of your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So this is a new one. I did send this document over to Sue so she could put it up, I think, on your website or in a link. Eventually it'll be on the SEAL website. It's not there yet. Now this applies to both general education and special education students. There was a bill that was passed and went into effect this school year, and it has to do with being allowed to excuse mental health reasons. It's a good bill. What I need people to understand is it doesn't mean that that students can have unlimited absences because of mental health. It's just that mental health can be used as an absence. And I'm going to go back here again. There's the Washington Administrative Code, so you can see what excused absences are. And there's quite a list there. I'm glad the mental health is there. A school district also, and again, this depends upon the school team, and it's actually school specific, not necessarily district specific. They can ask the parent to provide medical documentation before excusing a mental health. And principals are authorized, that's the terminology that's used, to determine if it meets the criteria for an excused absence. I can't think this year of any school principal or school team that has questioned a mental health absence. Again, if a student is repeatedly and continually missing school, though, we need to take a look at, okay, what do we need to be doing different to support this student? If the student has an IEP, then or a 504 plan, I ask parents to review a revised code that has to do with students attending school. And this has specifically to do with a parent will call and say that the school unenrolled my student. I then typically, and I had to do this a couple of weeks ago, called a director in this particular school district and said, are you aware of this? And I'm going to explain to you what this is in just a minute. Does anybody have any questions about this new bill that went into effect and the new excused absences for mental health? So what I was just referring to here was a truancy letter. Parents don't necessarily always get a truancy letter. This is for specifically special education. And this is not in regards to a court petition. This is a truancy letter or an email that a parent could potentially receive from a school saying, we're going to unenroll your student. If the student has an IEP or a 504, and this is one of those educational pieces that I go back to school teams and go, you better read this first, because there's a requirement under this RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington, for students on IEPs or 504s. And it has to do with the steps that they need to do first. And that is convene the IEP team or the 504 team, including a behavior specialist or a mental health specialist, to talk about the absences and find out why or what we need to do. If necessary, then, and if the parent consents, we do a functional behavior assessment, a new functional behavior assessment, to determine why the student is not attending school. And a behavior plan has to be put into effect, and data has to be tracked to determine the progress. That has to take place prior to just unenrolling a student. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about a director or somebody like that in a school district, because the ones I've talked to, a lot of them aren't aware of this. I just call and remind them, you better look at this. I have in this document, does this mean meeting with one person from school is sufficient? No. Does it mean a behavior specialist or a mental health person should be at that meeting? It really depends. If we're talking about behavior or mental health concern, then yes, they should be there. And then I have some suggestions really taken out of the language of this RCW, writing to the school team in regards to, I'm requesting that we consider that we hold a meeting to talk about the absences. And this is just the details of what I suggest is in that email or letter or whatever you're going to do. And so that's the first step, is sending a response to the special education director so that they're aware. And then the next would be to look at the district's appeal process. And there's some codes for you to consider. I went through that fast. It's another document I've given Sue. I've had this document for a while, that I don't just hand it out. More and more families, if they're being unenrolled, get an email. This still would apply for the special education student or a student on a 504. We need to consider this RCW, and we need to take a look at why. I have some school teams that actually will do a FBA, functional behavior assessment, and go to the student's home. Well, I mean, is there something we can be doing here? If there's an outside community partner involved, like Catholic Community Services or your Department of Disability, DDA, they could be a part of that as well. What are we going to do to support the team? Remember, the student is always the center of everything we're doing. Again, do I have some grumpy schools? Sure, but I'm grumpy sometimes too. But I also have some phenomenal teams too that do as much as possible. And quite frankly, there's a lot of them that are really exhausted, just like parents are really exhausted. There is a lot of mental health and a lot of behavior going on, and it's hard for everyone. So, any questions about this one?
Yeah, you do have a question here in the chat from Richard Cross. FBA for a SPED child with sensory-based interoceptive awareness challenges, i.e. difficulty in interpreting or sensing internal feelings and motivations. Any suggestions about how to navigate or advocate the FBA process, as it seems to seek the motives, intentions of a child's behavior to be modified when this specific child's behavior may be a result of sensory overwhelm, such as fear or anxiety?
Part of that functional behavior assessment could be taking a look at that as well. What do we need as adults to respond to that? And it might be someone else that would look at the functional behavior assessment besides like the school psychologist, or a behavior person. It could be an occupational therapy that looks more at that sensory piece. And then if you have an outside OT, you would want to involve them as well. It would be looking at it differently. And again, it's even back to, and I'm going to jump us back to that whole legal process I was telling you about. A student can't necessarily follow a plan if their body's not allowing them to. And so we need to find other measures and put them into place. I think I kind of answered the question, but it's really going to be involving more people. And sadly, a school team will not always know that they can involve more people. And as then the parent, we have to ask. And then typically they'll try to find out, not always, but they'll try to find out. But that would be my suggestion for that one. That was a great question. Anything else? I have listed some definitions for the absences so people can so you can read them. And there are also some really good documents on the OSPI website in regards to attendance, and every district has a truancy liaison person. And I've discovered some districts don't know who that is. I just haven't obviously found the right person who would know, but there is a list on OSPI of who this district is reported to them is that person. Okay. Here is my list of the documents that are currently on the SEAL website. And if you go under the tab documents and under behavior and school discipline, there's one that just is a general overall for all students. And there's one for special education students. Then there's that classroom exclusion document we just went over. And then I have two different documents. One is an overview of all discipline for all students. One is for special ed. The next two documents I spend a lot of time with parents is the isolation and restraint. That document is really heavy with what definitions are for those. And then also short-term suspensions and in-school suspensions are on the SEAL website. And then the documents that aren't on the website, only because I think it's important that I or whomever hears kind of what's going on so we can make some explanations. One is the emergency expulsions. And actually, I should probably put that one on anyway, because I get a lot of phone calls about emergency expulsions. What I hear, though, my child's been expelled. They can never go back to school. Well, it is normally almost always an emergency expulsion. And then explaining that an emergency expulsion can only take place for 10 days and then it has to be converted. The other one is that manifestation we already went over. And I also have a form that goes over the questions that I even use during a meeting. So we're covering it. Change of placement is another excellent document. However, I don't like to just hand it out, because if it's determined that a student needs to change the location, not just the location, where their least restrictive environment is, that becomes a change of placement. So for example, if a student is involved in one of the three circumstances, that's drugs, a weapon to school, or a danger to themselves or others, the district could request the student do a different placement, even temporarily. I even got involved in the last month in regards to a school district that was doing that in terms of they wanted to change placement outside the school district. And then we had to go into the legal system in order to resolve that one. The other one I call a conference meeting. So if a student has been suspended, often your building principal, vice principal, whoever is responsible for discipline will say, let's have a re-engagement meeting. Well, a re-engagement meeting is actually a formal meeting, but a conference, and they call it a re-engagement meeting. It's actually a conference meeting where they talk to the student, you're not going to do what you did before, which I kind of giggle at sometimes. So that conference meeting form I have goes over the questions if there was a restraint or isolation in regards to what actually took place, and if it was an emergency expulsion or suspension. So there's that document. the re-engagement meeting, let's say a student's my son's been kicked out for months. Okay, well, a student has a right to a re-engagement meeting to meet with the school team and say, I've been doing counseling, I've been whatever it is, and then ask to come back into the school. It doesn't mean it has to be permanent, but that's the re-engagement meeting. The other one that, and I just kind of smile when I say this, is bus suspensions. It makes a difference on a student's IEP, whether they have special transportation or regular transportation, regarding whether bus suspensions count or not. So there's that document as well. So, and these are documents just related to behavior and school discipline. So, and that's what I have. Are there any questions?
I have a question, just because all, building admin are different. And what do you see as the challenge when there are issues with a school building or staff at a building that maybe aren't adept at the procedures for like a manifestation termination? What do you see? I don't really know how to ask this, but there has to be a level of knowledge with all of the building staff on how to deal with these challenging situations with students. So what are you seeing?
Sadly, not necessarily. 2 weeks ago, I was in most manifestation determination meetings are led by your school psychologist. And there are some school psychologists that don't know even the 2 questions to ask in terms of what the process is. And yeah, that could be frustrating. I try nicely to explain some of the things or guide the conversation. If it's been a really difficult team, I typically will try to reach out to the special education group, the admin group, to help support that. It honestly, and it also depends upon the school district. I consider some school districts much more open and willing to learn more. I have some school districts that will tell me, well, we've taught them that, and the school team will say, no, they didn't. So that's why I think all of our goal is that educational piece. It's not just for our students, it's for everything. And I often say, I don't think the school team is being, nasty or anything like that. They just don't know. And it's a matter of helping them through that process. I have the one I did a couple of weeks ago for the school psych. She was new to IEP Online, which is the software program a lot of districts around here use. And she didn't understand what that process was. And I just sent her a couple of my documents just to help her out. She asked for it. I mean, I don't do it otherwise. Did that answer some of your question? I think. Okay. One of the other, not assessment, but I'm seeing a lot is risk assessments. How that a school team will want to do. We want to do a risk assessment to see what we need to do to support the student. And again, this is something you can ask your district for their policies and procedures. What is your policy procedure for risk assessments? It got to a point where I was telling many parents, ask your district for the policies and procedures on risk assessments, because it's up to the district. And the reason for that is who's supposed to be on that team that makes those determinations. What documents are you going to look at? How are they going to get back to the parent? And it is different district to district. So that will help determine, is the student at risk? Are they at risk to come back to school? Honestly, there are a couple school teams that use things like that because they want to keep the student out of the building, which is frustrating, but it does happen. I would say it doesn't happen all the time. And there's some school teams that want to do it in regards to, what do we need to put on a safety plan for a student? And a safety plan is not what a student's going to do. A safety plan is what is the staff going to do to keep everyone safe, including that student. So anything else? I see somebody's hand up. It says Joshua's iPhone.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's not going to.
Hi. Sorry, I was
kind of late logging into the conversation, so I may have missed a lot of things, but just curious what all was covered around school discipline. I think I was logging in when truancy got on, and there was some conversation about re-engagement meetings, and then we were talking about risk assessment. It seems like a lot to cover as far as the different types of laws and provisions that apply.
Yeah, and the two documents, I don't know if you saw the mental health absence document where I list the what the WAC codes are. It sounds like you saw the truancy one. I'm trying to think. I gave some terminology at the beginning. I'll go back here. I gave some terminology. Here it is. In regards to what the definitions are for a free, appropriate public education, FAPE. What is actually involved when you develop an IEP and review it and revise it. I'm trying to think what else you might have. Oh, and my quote, that all students, I love this quote, all students are general education students. Some just also have special education services. I'm amazed at how often even staff don't realize that our student is not a special education student. They are a general education student. And they have all the rights that a general education students have. Now they have extra ones if they're a special education student as well. But I think it's really important that we remember that they are a general education student to start with. And then I talked about the different paths that I talk to parents about in regards to when I get a call from someone, if a student has been suspended. And I talk about the legal system process they could possibly go through, the general education process that every student can go through, and then the special education process. I don't know if you had a specific question, but that's, I think most of what.
I guess I'm interested both from the perspective of a parent, but also as a policymaker, someone who's worked at OSPI when we wrote a lot of these laws, for to be specific, but also some work with legislators. So you were talking about re-engagement, which, under the law requires school districts to provide that under a long-term suspension of compulsion, general ed. There may be additional provisions depending on what the behavioral offense is with special ed, but just wondering what perspective was brought to the conversation, because I logged in late and it seems like a lot that was covered was around the special ed. Is that right? You're from a special ed kind of organization.
My background that I spend a lot of time is special education. That is absolutely correct. In the screen I have up right now, though, when I talk about the legal system, I talk about it from the standpoint of this is a general education student. And then general education, any student that's suspended has the right from a general education standpoint. That's the appeal, the re-engagement, all those pieces that go along with that. And then a special education student also has the additional rights of that manifestation determination meeting. So yes. I think those are the ones we went over. Yes. Then you could have missed. Yeah, I talk also about what our responsibilities are in order to get the services a student needs, because they need to have seat time. And then I tell parents, not to pick their student up from school unless they're suspended, because that actually helps. And then we have some tracking, and we need to do different things for the student. What a lot of people don't know is when you look at some of what we follow in special ed are actually general education. For instance, suspensions, isolation and restraint, those follow, that applies to any general education student. And sometimes there's a lack of understanding about that. So I spend time in supporting some families in with administrative law judges, and we talk through that. Technically, and as you're probably aware, a functional behavior assessment is not even required unless we're in that manifestation determination process, and then one other time. So
that was awesome. And then I also wanted to point out, Joshua, we are recording this meeting, so we will have it posted by tomorrow on our website. So we have a link in the chat. But also you can just Google TSEPTA. And then another question from Richard Cross, functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan development. Are there minimum professional qualifications and protections required by law? For example, board certification, psychologist, behavior specialist, credentials, etc.
There is nothing in the IDEA that talks about the requirements for who actually performs those. I have seen functional behavior assessments, and then let me back up for a minute. When we do a functional behavior assessment, we shouldn't be doing that in the behavior plan at the same time, because the question of the functional behavior assessment is, here's what we're seeing in a nutshell. And should we do a behavior plan for the student? And that's part of the parents' process too, is to help and be involved in that decision. Now, it's not unusual then that we go back and say, well, we don't have enough answers. Maybe we do, and the parent could request that they bring in someone who is more specialized, maybe a BCBA, be board certified, who can get a little more in depth. But other than that, there's no criteria for the educational or the experience of the person doing the FBA. And again, in the IDEA, an FBA, the one time it's required and is under that manifestation process. So I say amazed again, how often we have a behavior plan for a student. They have not done an FBA for several years. They're not using the behavior plan because it's not effective. So we got to step back again as part of that evaluation process. What do we need? What answers do we need in order to support the student? You can't do the one. It's even like an IEP. You have to have the evaluations first, and it's the evaluations that drive the IEP. A good question. Did I tell you there's a test at the end? No, just kidding. Everyone's panicking, going, oh no. I actually do that to some of the volunteers sometimes when we do trainings. You should see their faces. I'm bad. I should go back to that same picture. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to call out, again, I know that, we plastered it in the chat, but feel free to search CLK12, and you guys have your email posted there. So if anybody has any more in detail specific questions or situations, please reach out to the CLK12. You guys are more than happy to help, it looks like.
We are. Sometimes it's just hard to get a hold of us because we are so... There's such a need right now. I don't know what the answer to that is, but we're trying to help as fast as we can. So thank you.
I don't know if there are any more questions.
I have one, but maybe
Okay.
not
Good.
this in particular, but what if somebody would like to become a volunteer?
Oh, for CLK12? Denise is on here. They'd reach out to her. We have a kind of a formal 2-page, this is what you're agreeing as a volunteer. And all of our volunteers have been in the same situation, have a student. We're in the middle of probably doing a little revamp on our volunteer program, but yes, the more people as possible. Matter of fact, one of the type of volunteers, we have them separated in 2 areas. One's advocacy and one's projects. And I would love somebody that would help me with my documents and to make them fancier, to put out there, and fancier. And then also putting in a lot. There's 4 main workshops I do a lot. I do a Did You Know workshop, and I do an evaluation workshop, an IEP one, and then behaviors in school discipline. And I'd love someone to help me with PowerPoint on it. So yes. So that could be a volunteer too. There you go. Thanks for that plug, Sarah.
On that line, what do you have any upcoming meetings or other trainings that people can attend? Anything coming up?
We're just getting ready to do an IEP one towards the end of April, but we haven't set the dates yet. I have parents, we just couldn't decide if we were going to go back to trying to do a Saturday one again virtually, and then also do one during the day. So, yep. What typically after spring break is when I do a lot of the behavioral school discipline one in past years, but the last 2 years, it's just started from the day school started in September. So, yes. Oh, we once a month try to do a question and answer period as well. Sometimes if there's a group of people that have questions and they just want to have some answers, they can contact Denise and she'll schedule something too. Yeah.
I like that, having like a general kind of meeting where you can ask whatever you want to ask.
We've done that the last couple of months, and we've had quite a variety from different districts that have come in, and you know, people have a specific question. So I haven't followed the chat. I'm presuming you guys are, if anybody has another question.
Right.
Yep, that was all the questions in the chat so far.
Okay. Well, I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thanks so
Sure.
much. That was really good. And I hope things get better. I wonder how much of this is, I mean, in your experience, has this been like since the COVID shutdowns and things, that things have just escalated with these discipline cases? Do you see a correlation with that?
Behavior and school discipline, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely a correlation there. That mental health piece, students refusing to go to school, just the frustration in general. When I attended a law conference, it was last year, maybe it was actually right after COVID, they talked about, it was like a 600% increase of mental health for teens since COVID. And those statistics were just unbelievable to me to listen to. So even, and since we spend a lot of our time in the special education world, I can even think of friends I have who have general education students, and it's just a rough time right now. So, yeah.
Are there any more questions? Anybody want to raise their hand or unmute and ask a question before we wrap up? I hope everybody got to see in the chat all the websites and the resources there. But you can always go to either the CLK12 website or our website and get more information. And thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Again, I guess the interesting thing about behaviors and school discipline is you really don't know you need it till you need it. So even letting people know that you know to reach out and look at the SEAL website or ask those questions, because it's a scary time for everyone when there's a discipline issue going on or an extreme behavior going on. So,
And even if you have an issue with your student, you know, when they're in elementary school, they might have a different issue in middle school. It's totally different, you know, because things are always changing and students are changing, and you think you know what you think you know what's going to happen, and you don't always know. So
one of the questions really quick that somebody had asked me was the bullying piece of that mental health. And mental health can't necessarily be used because a student's being bullied. Now, a student who's being bullied can have a mental health issue because of it, but that was kind of the distinction we were talking about. So I just thought I'd point that out. I was just thought about it.
Before, there's one thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is somebody that I know, I don't think she's in the meeting right now, but she had an issue with her son and another student that was bullying him. He's a special ed student, and it was, from what I understand, a gen ed student that was bullying him and assaulted him outside of in the school and outside of the school. And they actually filed the police report against him. So, but I guess the schools are not required to enforce a no contact.
They're not required to enforce court orders. No,
Okay.
I didn't realize that till a bunch of years ago when I was again at the law conference and they were presenting that. that they're not required to. It's interesting because a lot of schools have no contact orders they use in the school system. There's nothing official about it, but they do that, don't look at each other, don't talk to each other. And the only repercussion I've ever seen to that would be, a suspension for one of them. But yeah, they are not required to, which I find interesting. I don't know why, or I don't know the reasons behind that. So, but I have actually heard that, and there's court rulings on that as well. So
Could that also be because it conflicts with the, the law of access to education? So then you have a no contact and you have access to education. It's competing laws.
yes, I hesitate. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of horror stories too about the whole bullying and what happens with that. And a student who is released from one district and goes to another district and repeats the offense, that it's a really tough situation, because yes, everyone is entitled to an education. That education does not necessarily mean they are in their general education placement, though. Education can take, because there are interim alternative locations for education that can take place for general ed and special ed. But those are available as well. So one of the, I guess, the nice things with COVID is there's a lot more ability for virtual and online now, which does not work for a lot of students, but that is available. So, and it can give them access. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight and answering questions. And we hope to have you back sometime soon. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it. Night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.